Because I just forgot.
It's her fault.
It is her fault.
I don't think I have.
Yeah, that's not one. Citizens Academy and that is probably. But she's got few blood cells. No, I did not.
Okay, we are going to call to order this regular meeting of the City Council for Monday, July 27th, 2026. All stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we will please have the roll call, please.
Mayor Donovan,
Here.
Councilwoman Niner,
Here.
Councilwoman Doomer,
Here.
Councilman Patterson,
Here.
Councilwoman Elliott.
Quorum being present, we will now proceed with the approval of the agenda. One note that I want to make on the agenda is that there was a typographical error where items 2, 3, and 4 are items for consideration. So the items for consideration line should be just below public comment, and so that's how the agenda should be looking. Does anyone have any questions or concerns with the agenda as presented? No, nothing being heard, it will be approved by unanimous consent. We'll now take a look at the consent agenda. Is there any questions or concerns with the consent agenda as presented? Hearing none, it will be approved by unanimous consent. All right, we'll now go into public comment. If anyone from the public would like to speak, please come to the podium, address the council by giving us your name and address, and please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Okay. And we will close that portion of our agenda for public comment. We'll now go on to items for consideration. And the first up is Bill number 2624, an ordinance approving the rezoning application for 402 South First Street from light industrial M1 to general business.
Thank you, Mayor. I will take this one for Missy. The rezoning application that you have before you is submitted by Mark Idell. This is to rezone the property that after it was split down there at a previous action that you all have taken. And this is to rezone it from M1 to C1 to reflect what really was going on to not have to have that conditional use permit. So this was come actually at the recommendation of council, or the request of council, I apologize, not recommendation. Planning and zoning did hold their public hearing on July the 7th with a recommendation of approval to you all. So that it is now before your consideration to do so. This was part of their requirement on that conditional use permit that it needed to be done within 90 days.
Is there any comments from council?
Ready to make a motion? I'll make a motion to approve Bill 26-24, an ordinance approving the rezoning application for 402 First Street from light industrial M1 to general business C1.
I'll second.
Okay, there is a motion to approve. Are there any comments or questions from council? Is there anyone from the public that would like to make a comment? Okay, then we will have a roll call vote, please.
Councilwoman Niner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Doomer,
Yes.
Councilman Patterson,
Yes.
Councilwoman Elliott.
Yes.
Bill number 2624 has passed. Next up is Bill number 2626, an ordinance establishing a procedure to disclose potential conflicts of interest and substantial interest for certain officials.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This ordinance before you is really just to help you know when to disclose conflicts of interest, when those disclosures are necessary. And it also talks about who must file those yearly financial disclosures, which is you all and myself. So this ordinance we just pass every other year so that it stays fresh, but there are no changes to its content from its previous versions.
Are there any questions or comments from the council? If there isn't,
I'll make a motion to approve Bill number 2626, the ordinance establishing a procedure to disclose potential conflicts of interest.
I'll second.
we have a motion and a second. Is there any comments from council? Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on this? And we will have a roll call vote, please.
Councilwoman Niner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Doomer,
Yeah.
Yes.
Councilman Patterson,
Yes.
Councilwoman Elliott.
Yes.
Okay, bill number 2626 has passed. Our next item for consideration is bill number 2627, a resolution authorizing a communications services agreement with the Cass County Sheriff's Office.
Good evening again. So tonight you have before you the actual resolution that would allow us to move forward with the communications services agreement with Cass County. So as you'll remember at your last meeting, the chief and I gave an overview presentation of why we are recommending this change. The biggest challenges that we discussed were the high staff turnover, the burnout that our staff are experiencing because of that turnover, the vacancies that we continue to see, the fact that officers, sergeants, even lieutenant have to take over on dispatch shifts often. We also talked about the technology challenges that we face with the new technology that we have to often implement from the ESD. And so at the end of that presentation, we brought forward our recommendation to move forward with consolidating our dispatch with the county. So as I mentioned tonight, before you is the resolution to actually approve that contract. So I'm gonna go through just a summary of what that agreement has in it, and then in your packets, I did prepare a memo that goes over answers to a lot of questions that either you all had, public comment, or things that we've heard since that meeting. And I'm just gonna kind of take a couple of the highlights from that, just so that we're all on the same page. So the agreement before you tonight provides for Cass County Sheriff's Office to do our dispatch services. They will take over receiving emergency and non-emergency calls for service. They'll dispatch our units and provide other communication support. It's important to note that our police department and our officers will still be the ones responding to calls under this model. And this agreement is structured as a one-year agreement with annual renewals upon mutual agreement of both parties. So every year this would come back to you all for approval. And at that point, we would know if there were going to be any increases in the cost or any changes to that agreement on a yearly basis. If you all approve this agreement tonight, the city's dispatch services would be fully transitioned to the county by October 1st. So they asked for a 60-day transition period. They have given us the details of what that timeline looks like. Training for staff, sharing of data, things like that. So that's what that timeline would look like if this were approved. The fees for service under this model are a $1,500 minimum base fee that covers our first 125 calls for service. Every call thereafter is $12 per call. When we look at what the budget impact is, currently dispatch is budgeted under the city's general fund. That's our fund that covers all basic city services. We currently budget about $420,000 for dispatch. Under this model, if we take our 2025 calls for service numbers, this contract would cost us about $90,000. So a net budget impact of annual savings of approximately $328,000 in the general fund. So I'm gonna jump over to that memo. So I already talked about the challenges that we face. So under the Q&A section, one of the things that we really just wanted to make sure that people understood is how this change will affect the way that residents receive their emergency services. And really, residents should not notice a difference. They'll continue to dial 911 if they have an emergency, and the same police, fire, EMS will arrive at their location as they do now. And currently, if a resident is calling for a medical emergency or a fire, their call is answered by our dispatch, but then transferred to the county, who then dispatches for the fire department. So the Cass County Communications Center is already used to doing dispatch for our community for fire and EMS. So the residents really should not see a difference in how they receive their emergency services. One thing that came up during our conversation last week from council was the desire to keep the police department accessible to the public 24/7. And I think when we were having that conversation, we were all maybe still under the mindset of what a resident interacting with the physical building was in the past, which was when they would walk in, there would be someone sitting at a lobby window to help them. With our remodel, if you went over there now and you walked into the lobby, which would continue to be open 24/7 under this model, you walk in and during regular business hours, there is a person there that can help you at that lobby window. But after regular business hours, so after 5 p.m., if you walk in there now, there is a button on the wall that you can press. It will dial you down to dispatch. You won't actually see a person. They can see you through the kind of like a Ring doorbell camera. And then they would dispatch an officer to the lobby to meet with you. So currently, when a resident walks in after hours, they're not interacting face-to-face with a person currently. And under this model, we would work with the county to either have a button like there is now, or a phone that when you pick up, it immediately dials their dispatch center. They can dispatch an officer to come meet you in the lobby just as you would now. So I just wanted to make sure that we made sure that was clear, that lobby will still be open to the public 24/7 as it is now. There was also a question about will there still be a non-emergency number, and the answer to that is yes, there will still be a way to contact dispatch about items that are not a 911 emergency. We were asked if other agencies utilize a similar model to this. And the city of Peculiar utilizes this model where they are dispatched by the Raymore Dispatch Center, so that's another kind of larger city that uses this model. And then Cass County also dispatches for Lake Winnebago, Garden City, Archie, Drexel, and Cleveland PD, as well as several different fire districts and departments, including our own. So this would not be a new model for Cass County or for other cities in our county. Those were really the highlights from the Q&A that I wanted to make sure that I hit. If you all have any other questions, I will do my best to answer them. We do also have Chief Clay here, as well as some representation from both Cass County if you have questions specifically about the contract or how they will handle that service. So let us know what questions you have and we will do our best to answer them.
Any questions?
I don't have any questions. I got most of mine answered the other night, today, so.
I just want to say thank you for putting together this Q&A. It's very, very helpful. I think that it definitely speaks to the public concerns, and I appreciate that it's so clearly defined.
Is the Q&A, is that going to be available on the website? Already is, maybe even?
It's not yet, but Kylie has already drafted a press release with a lot of this information if this were to go through, so that can be immediately available on our social media and our website.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to have this information.
Any other questions or comments from council? Is there a motion for bill number 2627?
I'll make a motion to approve bill number 2627, a resolution authorizing a communication service agreement with the Cass County Sheriff's Office.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Is there any other discussion from council? Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on this topic? Then we will have a roll call vote, please.
Councilwoman Niner,
Yes?
Councilwoman Doomer,
Yes.
Councilman Patterson,
Yes.
Councilwoman Elliott.
Yes.
Bill number 2627 has passed. All right, we will now go on to our presentation portion, which is our community survey.
While they're walking up here, I'm excited to have Porchlight Insights here to give us a presentation on the results of the community survey that went out. And I got a little sneak peek of this presentation. It's really great and really in-depth, so I'm excited to have them here talking to you tonight.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having us back to present these results. I'm really excited because this was a very interesting survey to work on, and I also really kind of love Pleasant Hill, and so this was a great way to get to know your community and the people who live here a little bit deeper by looking at them through the data lens. But I'm sure most of the insights I'm going to share with you today really are things that you already know, that you hear from your constituents, but just keep an open mind. Some of the results will give you some real a nuance to what some of your residents are feeling and thinking about the community and the services provided by the city. So as this gets pulled up, just again, a little reintroduction for myself, Julie Steenson. My coworkers and I work mostly with local governments and sometimes nonprofits and foundations doing data work. So doing surveys and data analysis for surveys, key performance indicators, really anything that you do at a business, that's what we help local governments do as well, so that we're bringing some transparency and also accountability to the local government space. We loved data, and so getting to play with this data was really fun. I will say, and we can skip through some of our team stuff, agenda for today, We're gonna look at the administration of the survey, so I can kind of bring that around to when I came last time and told you about how we were going to do it. So I'll tell you how we actually did it and what the results there were. And then we'll talk about the survey results themselves. And so buckle up, there's a lot of data. We're gonna run through it quickly, but I'll make sure, if there's a point at which you have a question, I'm gonna try to pause throughout so that we can address any nuanced questions you might have. If anything we can't answer right now, we'll go back and do some more analysis and bring back to you and make sure you have the answers that you want or that you think your constituents will want. So, all right, now that this guy is up, we can go on to slide 5. So if you want to scroll through these guys. All right, so how we ended up doing this, we went out to your residents through a lot of different channels. So whether that was social media, through the city's social media, we had some flyers and different community spaces. We made physical copies available at City Hall, so anyone who is not really digital savvy could come and do a physical copy. And then we also had the option for folks to call us. And we did have a few folks call us. And those were really, not only did they answer our questions, but they gave us some colorful commentary as well. And so I honestly loved that, because then when we saw some of these numbers, we're like, right, everybody did say something about that. So that was actually really, really fun for us. So what, for a community this size, these response rates are amazing. I think that people were hungry to provide input and I think we're glad to be asked for their input. So 690 people started the survey. People sort of fell off as it got longer and longer, and we usually anticipate that. 592 were completed all the way through. And then 538 of those were verified residents. They provided their address for us. They clicked, yes, I am a resident. So we were able to say over 500 people from your community took this survey. We also had 152 residents who either didn't answer the question, so we couldn't really put them in that sample, or they said no, that they were a business owner or someone else who was a stakeholder in the community, wanted to take the survey, but we're not a resident. And so there'll be places throughout the survey where I found any differences, or I've made notes where there might be something interesting about non-residents versus residents, but honestly for both categories of stakeholders for your community, very similar responses. So nothing hugely of note. So we did compare the survey against your actual census demographics to make sure we were pretty close on that. We had a little bit higher participation by women, and it skewed a little bit older. So you'll notice throughout the presentation, I don't really talk much about the 18 to 24-year-old demographic. There were a few people who identified in that range. I'm really glad they took the survey. If we would have had it on TikTok, they probably would have taken it more, or reached them however you reach that demographic. But that group, really not enough to really cross-tab with and make any meaning out of it. So you won't see me talk about them. The other age groups had a decent response, so we're able to actually look at that. So. All right, the process. So we were back in late spring, and we talked about how we designed the survey. We worked with staff. We took your feedback and created a pretty solid instrument. We distributed it in different ways: utility bills, and again, all of the social media and posters, yard signs, which was a first for me. We used a local vendor as well, which I was really proud of. And then over the summer, we have been cleaning the data and validating the responses and looking at all of the key insights. Just as a reminder, several different sections of the survey that we'll talk about. We ask, of course, perceptions of the community. We ask about quality of individual city services. We ask people to prioritize. So of these services the city provides, choose 1, 2, 3 that you would want them to emphasize. And I think those are really important as you move into a strategic planning era for the community. And you'll see I've created a series of tables where it puts the prioritization for each section where that was an option. We also ask about revenue generators, because I know that is a topic of conversation for you. We also always ask a series of experiential questions. Have you visited a city park? Have you been to the rec complex? Did you do this or that? Have you contacted the city to report an issue? We use those mostly for some cross-tabbing of the other questions. So we calculate that against each other to see, is there a difference in people who have visited a park with satisfaction of parks versus someone who hasn't? So I'll embed that throughout, and we have some demographic differences about people who do different things in Pleasant Hill that might be useful if you're trying to understand who's actually using the services. And then of course, we had a demographic section where we could ask people about various aspects. Do they own or rent? What's their income level? Those type of things. So again, we could dig a little bit further into the data. All right, so how we looked at the results. Again, we looked at that importance rating for the sections where that was where we asked that. We really like to look at the results in different ways. We of course looked at just the pure satisfaction levels across and beside each other, and we'll talk about those throughout tonight's presentation. When we look at satisfaction ratings and importance ratings kind of against each other, we call that an IS rank, importance satisfaction ranking, and you'll see those. And those are really where we say if you've got high importance and low satisfaction, that should be the first thing you tackle. And so you'll see a bunch of tables that sort of tell you what rank order based on that calculation of importance and satisfaction. And then we've also produced some benchmarks for you, so you can see how you compare to different geographies. And so that might be the KC Metro, which we have a benchmark for. There's kind of a plains region, that's Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri. So you can look at the broader perspective and then a national benchmark for really all cities that were asked these questions. And another key way to look at survey data is to really look across those demographics. So we've done that. We've also provided a few maps by precinct as well, because we knew that that might be an important differentiator when you're thinking about especially capital investments and what different constituencies need in different precincts that you represent. So we also do theme analysis. I made sure I put it up here because I know Councilman Patterson, you talked about it. We did use some AI to help us create some themes. Now I'm still a little bit of a skeptic, so I went through and read every comment myself to make sure that those were adequate. And so got a lot of the open-ended questions into some really interesting themes. And you'll see where those shake out in the different open-ended questions. And so, because the survey was broadcast widely, like I said, we captured a few folks who were non-residents, but for this presentation, we're going to talk mostly about the people, that 528 a group of people who did say they were residents of Pleasant Hill. All right. Going into the perceptions. So these are the really high-level questions that are asked on a lot of city surveys. How is Pleasant Hill as a place to live, a place to raise children, and as a place to work? As a place to live and raise children, those questions had very high satisfaction levels, where a place to work had much lower scores, but you'll see that satisfaction does not really differ between groups, or satisfaction doesn't differ between groups who have children in their home versus who don't. So it's sort of perceived as this is a nice place to raise your family, whether you have kids or not. People want to be here to raise their family. Residents who are slightly older or who may have lived in Pleasant Hill longer also have a little bit higher level of satisfaction than the other groups with that question. As a place to work, I feel like that's a real area of opportunity, and we're going to talk about that throughout. The satisfaction level here is fairly low, and that's true even for anybody who said that they actually worked in Pleasant Hill. So we asked that question as well. Do you work in Pleasant Hill or outside? And so even folks who do live here or do work here and live here, we're not necessarily satisfied with it as a place to work. There's going to be a general theme throughout on economic growth and economic development for the community. And I think that that's going to give you some instruction as you go into strategic planning, what that might look like for the community. All right. We also asked a series of other sort of deeper questions about the community. And so this slide combined with the previous one really makes it clear to me that people really love living here. They feel safe here. They feel like it's a great place to be. When we begin to ask questions about more specific areas, like development, like the condition of sidewalks, you can see that that's where levels of satisfaction really begin to drop off some. I want to really specifically focus on a concern I see in this data and in this chart about city services. So the quality of city services has a low satisfaction overall. But more concerning to me is that when I broke that out and calculated it for people who said that they had reported an issue to the city versus those who had not reported an issue, satisfaction is actually lower for those who have had an issue that they've brought to the city to be addressed. So that's going to be true for some of the other city services as we dig further into the data. So what that tells me is that people who've tried to engage or who have reported an issue to the city are likely more frustrated or feeling like their question, their issue was not resolved in the way that they wanted it to be. I think it's really interesting as well that there is a little bit of a difference when we get to a future slide that customer service is actually not necessarily the problem. I think that people are generally satisfied with the level of customer service they receive from the city, but there is a breakdown somewhere where people are feeling like the quality of the service they're providing when they ask for something is not as high as those people who are like, no, I've never asked for anything and it's okay. So just kind of keep that in mind as we roll along the different sections. So looking next at one of the maps, I mentioned before, we'll look at the results geographically. So here's one example of a question from this section we just were in that did show significant differences between precincts. And so when you see a map like this and a little table, that should indicate that those questions in the map were the questions from that section that actually had a notable difference between. Some questions really didn't have a difference. It was sort of a universal satisfaction level. So here we have cleanliness of city streets and public areas and condition of sidewalks. Both of those were lower for residents who lived in precinct 22. And so you'll see that on the map. The darker blue is higher satisfaction, where it starts to get more light blue. This kind of shows up as white in precinct 22. Those two questions had lower levels of satisfaction, as you can kind of see from the table as well. Precincts 20 and 21 on these questions did not have substantial differences. So that, I don't know if that's the same, if that infrastructure was built out about the same time versus 22 or not, but that's, kind of how it broke out by the different geographic areas.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do we have a breakdown of how many people were answered in 20, in 21, and 22?
Oh, good question. Yes. I'll ask Rwanda to look that up really quick for us as we're going through. I did not label it, and I should. So thank you for asking that. Yeah, we'll get that number for you. All right, looking at major city service categories. So on this survey, we asked some really overarching questions about city services as sort of an introductory section. We did have a decent response rate to this question. So these are pretty reliable results. So looking at overall satisfaction with things like police services, parks, development, and so forth. So I can say easily that police services and city park facilities are real strengths of Pleasant Hill. I hope you know that because the sentiment from your residents was very strong in both of those areas. Customer service, as I said, from city employees also had fairly high ratings. Areas with lower satisfaction include streets and infrastructure, and then how well the city is managing growth. Municipal utilities actually had a low neutral, which is that gray line. So on a 5-point scale, that's a 3. And I usually think of that as they don't really know, or they want to rate it, but they aren't quite sure. And so they don't feel strongly one way or another. Well, municipal utilities, pretty much everybody felt one way or another. There was a low level of neutral for that area. So that just tells us that, residents know, right? They know how they feel about it. So again, I don't think that surprises any of you. Stormwater runoff management also had a higher level of dissatisfaction and a lower level of neutral. And honestly, that's one of those places where when we did have phone calls from the half dozen folks who did call in, almost every one of them into stormwater as an issue they'd like to see addressed. So that, I think that should be something to factor in and think about. I mentioned looking at these results compared to their level of importance. So on this next table, given the lower level of satisfaction already, and then combining it with 67% of people said it was an important thing for the city of Pleasant Hill to emphasize, city streets and infrastructure rose to the top of this ranking table by quite a lot. But very much on the heels of that, you see how well the city is managing development activity, residential, office, retail, industrial. Also was number 2 with lower satisfaction and a higher level of importance placed on that issue. I will say the color coding here indicates where it falls within those benchmarks, as you can see in those last 3 columns. So a red indicates that it fell below the benchmarks. Yellow is sort of, it's either mixed, maybe it's above some benchmarks, or it's fairly close, it's one or the other. And then the green, obviously, are those areas of real strength where they are exceeding the benchmarks. I definitely think the city parks facilities, that's one to be really proud of, because honestly, our KC Metro ranks really highly on parks just in general. So you are right at the benchmark. And so that's something to be really proud of as a community. I will point out, I think in terms of, that question about customer service, again, I sense a distinction because people didn't say it was that high of a priority to them. And so they're already sort of happy with it. It's not a high priority for improvement, but I think there must be something else going on in the overall quality of services provided that's definitely worth digging into. All right, so for every section, I will have a notable insights table for you. Most will be color-coded. Blue or purple is areas where that's area of strength. The gold color are where satisfaction levels are lower. So you can see here, again, re-emphasizing satisfaction with police and parks is kind of universally high for anybody and everybody in the community. By contrast, recreation programming, though, is overall lower, and it actually had some interesting differences when we looked at those demographics. So recreation programming has lower satisfaction with households who have children and with households who have participated in youth sports through parks and recreation. So definitely something to keep an eye on as we go through this, because that shows up again. That combined with the next insight, I think that sort of reemphasizes the customer service, and people who are users and have interactions with the city tend to have a little lower satisfaction level kind of across the board. Satisfaction is higher with code enforcement for a few groups, which I thought was interesting because code enforcement ranking across all cities everywhere is fairly low satisfaction, and the benchmark there is never high. But lower income households, younger and newer residents, and also renters had higher levels of satisfaction with code enforcement activities. So that means that you have lower satisfaction with homeowners, higher income groups, and older residents. This is often, for me, an indication that more code enforcement may not be what you're looking for, but maybe it is. It could be a sentiment that is backed by the open-ended questions that we'll see later. But I think that's something to dig into about what residents are really seeking. Definitely heard a lot about litter and debris, open storage on front porches, things like that in the open-ended comments. And so I'm guessing, I think the fact of the matter is everyone wants a clean and beautiful community. And I think the methods and the way that is carried out is probably up for debate among your residents. And so that's unfortunately where you all have to then make those hard decisions about how do you enforce codes, which codes are enforced, what does that look like in order to meet that ultimate goal of making Pleasant Hill a beautiful community to live in. All right, looking at it from precinct, here's the questions from this section. And I'm just curious, honestly, from your perspective, anything about these differences surprise you? Didn't have a lot of commentary on it other than, some of precinct 21 has some higher satisfaction in a couple areas and lower in others. So I don't know, does anything surprise you as elected officials about this? Okay, this tracks, all right. That validates my data, so thank you, yeah. All right, I've alluded to it a couple times, but here are what we call those experiential questions, where we ask respondents to tell us yes or no, have you done one of these things in the last year in Pleasant Hill? Many people, most of your people in town have been to a park or have attended a city-sponsored community event. Fewer folks have visited the rec complex, and also fewer people have reported a concern to the city. Though, as I said, that question has created some of those interesting insights about how people are interacting with the city and how satisfied they are. Lower down, you have a small percentage of respondents who say they have attended a city meeting, and thanks to those who are here, you are part of this percentage up on the screen. And then, of course, down at the very bottom is utilized household hazardous waste drop-off service. One thing we noticed with that, though, is a higher percentage of residents who, I think it was if they were wealthier, they actually used it more. If we move on to the next table, you can see how those different experience questions breaks down. More likely to do is actually, no, this one's a lower income, actually. Use household hazardous waste drop-off sites. But going back up to the top, visit a park, renters less likely to do are older adults. The rec complex, I sort of call this demographic there, like 35 to 44, lived here 6 to 10 years in that, two highest income brackets. Those are my people. Those are the other parents who are just like getting by at the rec complex. And so they're much more likely to visit the complex. Called PD, not a lot of variance, or no one in particular was more likely to call PD, but actually older age groups were less likely. Participated in a youth sport, again, sort of that middle-aged group, folks who've lived in Pleasant Hill a while and those with higher income. Then the reported a concern, these are folks who have lived here quite a while. So we had 8 or tenure is what we called it, but this was the second to highest. So we have 20 plus years living in Pleasant Hill, and then 11 to 20 years living in Pleasant Hill. And so they were the most likely to have reported a concern to the city. Attended a city meeting, lower income groups. Attended a community event, were again that middle age group and newer residents, as well as higher income brackets. And then volunteered your time for a community or an event. I haven't decided what to crosstab that against, so if you have anything you're interested in, that one is an interesting question. But that one also is skews a little older, longer term residents and higher income. All right, so now let's dig into individual sections of the survey. So this is maintenance and utilities. So, this section deals with all things infrastructure related, snow removal and maintenance of street signs, traffic signals, both high levels of satisfaction, real strengths here. Though you'll note in the yellow text box at the bottom, residents who've reported a concern again are less satisfied with street signs and signals. So those two questions. I can't tell, of course, from the survey data if they were reporting or calling about a street infrastructure issue, but I think it's notable that they then are less likely to be satisfied with these services if they have reported any issue to the city. As has already been said, maintenance of both streets in citywide and streets in your neighborhood, both are relatively low. In these, or the satisfaction is relatively low. And this really corresponds perfectly with a question we asked later in the survey about how, if any new revenue source was identified, what would you prioritize? And so 97% of residents said any additional revenue should be used to fund street maintenance. So pretty solid consensus there. Likewise, in the open-ended responses later, it'll show that streets are a really high priority for your strategic plan as well. So let's look at that geographically as well. So precinct 22 here has lower satisfaction levels on these maintenance questions. Honestly, given the conversation I think I walked in on earlier, and Councilman Niner, you were talking about street lighting downtown, it might be, you know, something that's desired. I think the survey would back that up, that street lighting, adequacy of street lighting is almost 10 points lower in precinct 22 than in the other precincts. So I think people are looking for that light in these areas. And then 20 and 21 are mostly aligned with these questions. Those signs and traffic signals is notably higher in precinct 20, or in 20. All right, when we look at that IS table, streets again rise right to the top. Maintenance of city streets, 27% satisfaction, fairly low compared to benchmarks. And this is notable for the KC Metro because you've got a lot of people who are traversing across community boundaries all the time and making those comparisons against, oh, the streets in Pleasant Hill aren't as good as the streets and wherever else. And so that benchmark in particular is notable, and so keeping that in mind. But that's sort of what made this one of the highest priorities. Is it's highly ranked as something people want to prioritize, and it has low satisfaction. Street lighting again is interesting. It's the third highest priority, and though it's below the KC Metro, it's actually pretty close to Plains Region and national benchmarks. So, and I think you saw the nuance there between the precincts as well. So, investment in street lighting, I think you could argue could go in targeted areas instead of doing a brand new street lighting program for the whole city. All right, focusing on utilities. Water sewer utilities came in as the third highest priority overall from responses about the strategic plan. And really knowing how big of a topic utility services are for you, I did look at quite a few of the variances to see where some of that nuance is. Billing satisfaction is lowest with higher income groups, renters, and those folks in that middle age group. And of course, we don't know, do they not like the process of the billing, or do they not like getting a bill at all? I think you could argue it could be one, the other, or both. But definitely some nuance there with individuals. Those who've lived in Pleasant Hill for that 11 to 20 years are less satisfied with the water distribution and line maintenance and with sewer services. There is then also a geographic difference. Again, precinct 22 comes in with the lowest level of satisfaction on this question. And I think that, you know, that shows up on the map, and then in the little table, you can see precinct 20 has the highest level of satisfaction, and 21 has sort of a middle of the road between the two sections. So if you'll move to the next.
This is a good
there we go.
spot for me to pop into.
Oh, yes, please. Yeah.
There's actually not that much of a participation difference between the precincts. So precinct 20 had 141 responses, precinct 21 had 152, and precinct 22 had 146 responses. So yeah, so very, very even.
Yeah. And I will say that wasn't necessarily planned. Like sometimes we try to stratify and we intentionally try to get that balanced, but I think it's a really good sign that people across the city were willing to participate in the survey. All right, looking at utilities, IS. I didn't point it out on the satisfaction chart, but residential trash and recycling services are also a real strength for Pleasant Hill, especially compared to benchmarks, really right within the margin of error for the metro, and then way above the other two benchmark areas. And then household hazardous waste was the only other benchmarkable question, and you know, it's within the right range, right? You're knowing that it's not a high priority for your residents and is not as widely used. I think that's a pretty safe level of satisfaction. So any questions before on this section, maintenance, utilities, before we move into the next section? All right, this next section was something I was very excited to analyze. You know, I've pulled two of the questions that were in previous sections into here so you could see them and so we could actually dig in and talk about them. So the overall quality of new development, and then how well the city is managing development activity. We talked about those a little bit earlier. You know, I wanted to look at these compared to each other. You can see how well the city is managing development has a lower level of satisfaction than the overall quality of new development. Both have pretty high levels of dissatisfaction though. So in those orange those orange squares in that graph, represent some pretty high dissatisfaction. One of the crosstabs that I thought was maybe informative and instructive for you all is that the highest income group actually has really polarized answers to this. And so I pulled that out as a specific chart because I thought that was interesting. They're either, they're a little more satisfied, they're sort of third in line for being satisfied, but then highest level of dissatisfaction with a fairly low neutral level. And so those are folks who feel one way or another about development or the quality of new development in Pleasant Hill. And I think there's some economic factors there. I think there's some development type activities that are a factor that we'll get to in just a moment. The survey doesn't really distinguish between commercial or housing development in these questions. So new development might mean different things to different people in these questions. But it's really worth noting that there are differing opinions about how Pleasant Hill should grow. I think you probably know that. Those who've lived here about 6 to 10 years or over 20 years are more satisfied with how the city's managing growth. So even though overall that's a lower level of satisfaction, there were some differences. People who've been here that middle amount of time or the longest are actually more satisfied with it. I think if you ask anyone out on the street, you would see the tension that's sort of represented in these, that there's going to be differences in how people feel about Pleasant Hill growing at all, which is really apparent here on this next slide about, is it important that as new development is added, that Pleasant Hill retains its character? I see this as, this is kind of a universal yes. To have something that dark blue to be so high, you'll notice in no other chart is it that high. People, when you ask them that question, are like, yes, absolutely. So it was a very quick 5 on a 5-point scale. But adding that with even the 4s on a 4-point scale, that's still a very high majority with a low level of disagreement. Even though it's universally true, there is some distinction. Middle income groups and those who've lived in Pleasant Hill for 6 to 10 years, and also older residents have the strongest agreement in this category. We also asked about light industrial specifically. Staff really asked us to think about that. And the strongest response there came from precinct 20, who were the most in favor. And then, following in the same footsteps as the question about Pleasant Hill as a place to work, you see in this third question, opportunities for job and career development had overall low satisfaction, and specifically low satisfaction with younger age groups, higher income, and those who don't plan to be living in Pleasant Hill in 5 years. I did a specific analysis on that later, but it was a question we asked, do you plan to be living here? And majority of folks said yes, but there is a small contingent of people who say either I don't know for sure, so there's uncertainty about it, or they've said no, I won't be here. And so I think there's some opportunities there as well. All right, let's look at my favorite question of the survey, which is commercial development types. So this was really interesting to sort of slice and dice from a data perspective. We asked a series of questions about how well each of these development types were met, how much the need was met in Pleasant Hill. And so I've ordered this from the highest level of unmet need, so the not met or partly met. And there's kind of a clear top 4 of development types that really represent what I am calling in my head things for people to do, right? Entertainment establishments, sit-down restaurants, arts and culture, theaters, museums, galleries, and then other types of retail. Specialty restaurants were close in there, but those top 4 are really clear to me and a really clear breakout. When we ask which of these 3 development types, we ask that prioritization question here. So, okay, you say it's not met, but then which would you prioritize if you had to? And so if you look at the next table, you can see 72% of respondents said sit-down restaurants is what they would like to see. Followed by entertainment, shopping for necessities and other sort of necessary or retail needs. This is actually one area where I did check the non-residents just to see if people coming into Pleasant Hill for the day to work, whatever, did they have a difference? And honestly, their top 5 were exactly the same, and maybe just in a different order. Retail was actually higher than grocery or pharmacy for people who don't live in Pleasant Hill, whereas those who live here were prioritizing grocery a little higher, which that kind of makes sense, right? That's your basic need versus, boutiques and shopping and things. So, so this was another pretty clear breakdown of restaurants, entertainment, and then grocery, retail, and then kind of falls off after that.
Did we have, like hotels, was that even an option?
You know what? No, we didn't ask about
Oh,
hotels.
okay.
Yeah. Is that something you hear from your constituents?
Well, we don't really.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't looked at the Airbnb map, but, I think potentially one would be of value.
Yeah. So sort of bringing this section all the way home, validating this question or these questions, economic and business growth, you'll see were also a huge priority for the strategic plan. When I looked at why people said they'd leave Pleasant Hill, it was actually the lack of amenities. Shopping, restaurants was one of the top areas listed. A few interesting breakouts that just left me a little puzzled was that childcare did not actually show up as less met for respondents with children. People said, no, that needs met. So, that's maybe a factor in when you're, authorizing zoning or doing any of that work. Childcare did not show up as something that people felt like they needed in Pleasant Hill. So, on the flip side, elder care was indicated as being less met, and it was specifically less met and a priority for those who are older. So that's a very interesting dynamic. Bars and breweries were less met for younger age groups, which I know is a shocker, and then grocery stores were a less met need for the lowest income group as well. And I hope that this is kind of a nice jumping off point for conversations for you about development and what are people actually seeking. This is about the most detailed development and economic growth section I've ever done on the survey. So you may see it in other city surveys, so we can benchmark against it eventually, because I really like it as a way to get sort of into the weeds about what people are really seeking. All right, looking at recreation and parks. These are areas of strength overall. So looking at maintenance of city parks and quality of recreation, or the quality of the rec complex, those you can see have the highest levels of satisfaction. But again, the dark blue is also notable here. That's, again, an area where people felt pretty strongly. And so you can see for the rec complex, that really stands out as people feeling really positive about the quality of it. And then, I think if you're talking about investments in parks, infrastructure or whatever, doing some sort of investment there or continuing upkeep and maintenance there is probably a priority, because it is something that people really care about. I want to focus on a couple of areas with lower satisfaction and higher levels of dissatisfaction here. So we're going to do some slides to dig into these as well, but youth recreation programs and then quality of the city swimming pool, we'll come back to those in a minute, but those are the ones we'll do a little deeper dive in. Notable geographic differences here. This map shows the fees charged for recreation. Is lower satisfaction from precinct 22. And there was also a big variance between satisfaction with maintenance of city parks in precinct 20 and the other 2 precincts. So I'll let this one sort of sink in for a second while you're sort of looking at that table. I was curious where your walking and biking trails are, if they are concentrated in one precinct or.
They're kind of spread out. I mean, Sugarland has a pretty nice one. We obviously have the bike trail downtown here.
Yeah.
Is it private? It's private though?
Sugarland's
private?
I mean,
Okay.
I'm not gonna I'm not gonna call anybody on
It's-
you.
it's- it's like you're in Illinois.
There's a parking lot down there.
Yeah, it's for them though, I guess.
Yeah, but it's not, the variance there is not huge. So but then some of these others, you do see some variance. All right, looking at the IS table next, it shows youth recreation programs and pools at the top of the areas for importance and emphasis. These top four are honestly areas for the city to consider for improvements and figuring out kind of what the next steps would be for maintenance or for additional infrastructure in these areas. Compared to benchmarks, you can see these fall well below the KC Metro. And again, that's the most relevant one because people are crossing boundaries all the time to visit other city pools or whatever. My daughter lives in Missouri and works at a pool in Kansas. But it's a more fluid in and out with people going to parks and recreation activities. The highlights, though, are, of course, those areas like maintenance of city parks where you are really close to the benchmark, and then quality of facilities such as shelters and playgrounds where you're also kind of close to that benchmark.
So the quality of the swimming pool, was that an open-ended question where people could actually say? Because this thing, it's new, and compared to what we had when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's a good question. We did do an open-ended theme analysis. I'm just looking, swimming pool operations showed up, and we can actually dig into those and give you a little more detail on what people were specifically saying.
Yeah, and
About
that's
the
my
pool.
question too, is it the pool management or is it the pool itself?
That's a good question. Yeah. Okay. So that's good insight. Yeah. The survey doesn't say that necessarily. But I'll look at those comments a little more in depth and divide them between quality of the actual pool infrastructure versus quality of the management. All right, so given its place on the IS table, I did dig into youth recreation a bit. The most important insight here is that those who say they have participated in a youth sport are more likely to be dissatisfied with the quality of youth recreation programs. And so again, back to that theme again of using a city service like this and being a little more dissatisfied with it. People with children in their household, upper middle income range, and middle age groups are also more likely to be dissatisfied with youth recreation programming. This really feels like an area that residents are asking for some investment. And speaking with the city manager, I think you did just hire a new recreation coordinator. So that's a perfect example of a good investment to start really ramping up and being responsive to these insights. All right, looking at the park amenities questions. So this is sort of all of those things that are a park amenity. Park facility maintenance was the second choice for residents if new or additional revenue was available. So that comes after streets and infrastructure. Highest income group was most satisfied with shelters and playgrounds. Middle income group stood out as being more satisfied with the maintenance of the city lake. And I should note here that in some of the comments, I did see some desire for more water activities, whether that was enhanced and more fishing opportunities, whether that was other types of stand-up paddleboarding was mentioned, just recreation opportunities on the lake. Again, pool saw lower satisfaction kind of overall, but for middle age groups and new residents, while the middle income group was actually more satisfied with the pool. So it might be the dynamic you're saying, Dr. Peterson, that is people who lived here a long time ago are like, man, this is an upgrade. But it could be those other residents are struggling a little. And then walking and biking trails had higher dissatisfaction for higher income groups. Don't really know the dynamic there, but that was a finding. All right, fees charged for recreation had a higher satisfaction rating as income went up. So you'll see it's almost an exact slope, right? So it's not likely a surprise that your income's higher, you can afford whatever fee you put on it. But essentially that would be an area to look at is, why are lower income folks less satisfied? Are you within a market range that's acceptable and so forth? This is one of the questions that actually had a positive correlation with use. So those who have participated in youth sports or visited a rec facility, the rec complex, or a park are actually more satisfied with the fees charged. So that tells me that people who have used it actually are more satisfied. Maybe they understand, comparatively to other youth programming, your stuff is better, or your fees are better than other areas. There's a slight increase in dissatisfaction for that middle-aged group again. All right, so here's the open-ended themes from the specific question about parks programming. So we asked, what parks programming would you like to see added that would be of interest to you or other members of your household? So this is in order of the number of comments that were within this theme. A lot of conversation about indoor recreation, community center, the words community center were dropped. Youth and family-oriented recreation and programming, again, youth recreation was a big theme. Senior programming came up as a theme as well. Trail and bike infrastructure, those were the top 5 comments. I will say a few specific sports emerged, and I didn't put them as individual themes because they sort of align with several different themes, but pickleball was mentioned. I think every city in America is like converting tennis courts to pickleball or whatever. It's such a craze right now. And then city, lake, and fishing, volleyball, soccer, and archery actually had a few questions or a few comments as well. So I thought it was worth pulling out. I do want to honor, you've got the asterisks here, that some comments actually said that nothing else needed to be added, that there was a concern about the affordability of the existing infrastructure and system. So didn't want to leave those folks out, as that it wasn't a huge theme, but there definitely were some comments about, hey, before we go building something new, we need to make sure we can maintain what we have. All right, any questions on parks and recreation? All right, so satisfaction with code enforcement, I think I said a minute ago, this area is always low satisfaction across all cities, and you'll see that in the upcoming benchmark slide. Responses were sort of divided, a third of people who were satisfied, people neutral, people dissatisfied. I do think that speaks to that tension of people wanting a really nice looking community, but unsure how code enforcement regulations actually play a role in that and if they should. So that dynamic is really playing out everywhere all the time. So you're really not on an island. This is sort of a normal look at these questions. Enforcing cleanup of litter and debris on private property and mowing and cutting in weeds always sort of emerge as the top 2 things that people want to see. Satisfaction and dissatisfactions are pretty even across all of these questions. Where we saw the differences were older residents, people who've lived here a longer time, higher income groups were the most dissatisfied with enforcing cleanup of litter and debris on private property. And really, to better understand this, I did go to those open-ended comments, and there were comments about, as I mentioned earlier, open storage, litter, things sitting on the porches, somebody had a couch on their porch and the neighbor didn't like it. There's all sorts of issues that people found sort of distasteful or they were unhappy with. And so, again, that's sort of the burden of being an elected official to figure out how you do that and how you do it well, while honoring everyone's right to have a couch on their porch, I guess. But however that plays out in the regulations that you have. And then looking geographically, Precinct 20 has the lowest satisfaction on enforcing cleanup of litter and debris. And actually, the lowest satisfaction on all of these enforcement questions that had any significant difference. Again, the enforcing litter debris on private property, highest on the IS table. Below benchmarks across all benchmarks, but as you can see, the goal is not 100% on these. So the goal is more in the 40% range. And so from that perspective, you're not that far off from where the other cities really are, because this is just universally a controversial issue. All right, communications and engagement. I think this is an area for growth for the city. There's definitely bright spots, things that your city is doing well. And then there's some things I think I see in this data that can be improved. So scores overall are relatively similar. So this is where those nuances and crosstabs really matter. The mechanisms of communication, like the city's website, social media, newsletter, they have higher neutrals, but they also have lower dissatisfaction. So this is where you're seeing some of the strengths. Obviously, the mechanisms are not disliked by residents. For me, the more concerning issue is the questions about feeling informed and having the ability to provide input. really across groups. Those who have attended a city meeting are more satisfied with their ability to provide input, and that sort of makes sense. But they're also more satisfied with the availability of information that's provided by the city. And so to me, that says coming to a city meeting and hearing from you is something that matters to their feelings that they know what's going on in the community. Demographic differences here, younger to middle age groups and those who've lived in Pleasant Hill anywhere from 6 to 20 years tend to be less satisfied with the availability of information about city programs and services. It's not shocking to me that it's also that middle age group, 35 to 44-year-olds who have a little higher dissatisfaction with the city's website. I think that's a demographic that website first is that's where I'm gonna go look for information before I do anything else. And then they, along with the folks who've lived here a little bit longer, 11 to 20-year residents, are more dissatisfied with their opportunity to provide input on city decisions. So looking at those against benchmarks, social media is honestly doing really well compared to benchmarks. Almost half satisfaction and then very much within the margin for the KC Metro. The question about opportunity to provide input, it's a case where the benchmarks are also relatively low, so your gap is not as big as it might seem when you're looking at your satisfaction levels alone. Moving folks in that area from neutral into more satisfied actually would go a really long way here, and I think that, I know you have open council meetings, I know you do things of that nature, so I think just doubling down on those types of activities and giving people an opportunity to feel heard, honestly, or doing a resident survey is part of that as well. And then using the results from the survey as you make decisions and then communicating that out. It's a really big feedback loop that residents really want to see, that I provided input about this thing, then you made this decision, and then this improved in my life. I think the best and quickest way to make an investment in communication would be some improvements to the city's website. Because it is below the city's or the metro satisfaction, that might be an indication that if people go out to other city websites, they're seeing, a slight difference. So that might be a somewhat of a quick win. On the next slide, you'll see why it's also important. So most people said that they're getting a lot of their information about what's going on in the city from the Facebook page, and I know it is. I started following it to just kind of see there's a lot of good updates. There's a lot of information out there, and so it's good that it's not a stale Facebook page. Some cities make the mistake of opening social media accounts and never posting, and that's not the case here. So that's great. And then of course the city website and newsletter came in second and third as places where people want to get their information. Interestingly, even though Facebook is a huge place for information, Instagram was not. It was not a preferred method. Social media in general, both Instagram and Facebook were preferred by 35 to 44-year-olds, and then the newsletter by the oldest demographic group, 65 plus. There were a few other sources that were mentioned, newspaper, city magazine, council meetings, bill inserts, Nextdoor, YouTube, and my favorite was word of mouth. Several people wrote that in. I mean, that's the nature of being in a smaller town, right? A lot of the news is coming from dinner table conversations, and nothing wrong with that. It's a source of information. And so making sure that whoever's leading those conversations at the local book club has the right information. That's the key here. All right, moving into police services. As my 16-year-old daughter would say, no notes. This is great. High levels of satisfaction, no notable crosstab insights. So it's universally a service that's rated highly. The lowest level of satisfaction, the lowest dissatisfaction was in enforcement of local traffic laws, and still that only had a 14% dissatisfied. So this is certainly an area of strength. You'll see on the table, compared to benchmarks, Pleasant Hill is blowing some of them out of the water, especially on things like the city's efforts to prevent crime. Much higher than the metro average, and then some of these others are also higher than the KC Metro. Visibility of police in neighborhoods had the lowest level of satisfaction and was the thing that was ranked #1 as a priority. But again, it's not substantially low, and so it's not something, if you want to dig in and understand what people mean by that, that would be great, but I think this is not an area I would focus on, honestly. All right, finally coming to the last section here. Again, this was something unique that we did for Pleasant Hill that we've not really done for other communities. And this was, these are a series of questions about trust in city government compared to other levels of government. And so you'll see here that there are similar levels of trust for Cass County and for the city of Pleasant Hill. Cass County had a slightly higher neutral, lower dissatisfaction, so that's how they beat you out. I think you can catch them. And then, of course, and this is a trend everywhere, that as people are more removed from their level of government, distrust grows. And so you can see that just playing out perfectly in your own community, and I think that's probably true in a lot of places. I would say the one thing to note is that the trust level in the city is a little more polarized, that there is sort of a third dynamic here as well. That third of people are, they trust you a lot, or they have a moderate amount of trust, which in this day and age, moderate amount is probably pretty acceptable. And then some trust is smaller, that you have polarized folks on the not much or no trust at all. People, when I was looking at this, I thought, people are they either trust you or they don't. And so there's not really a quick fix to this, but hopefully it affirms that you do have a community that is sort of divided in how they feel about their city government. And so there is then a burden to figure out how then you do build trust with folks. I really want to point out the third bullet point in the little yellow insight table. I think this is a real opportunity to review follow-up and follow-through with people. So people who reported an issue are actually more likely to say they don't trust the city. And so that makes sense. If you reported an issue and it didn't get resolved, then maybe you would lose trust, especially if you did it 1, 2, 3 times and nothing happened. And so I think this is a real opportunity to evaluate, where maybe the trust is breaking down, where there's a drop in the cycle. What their expectation was, and was it met? Was their expectation reasonable, and how could you help set reasonable expectations? Because it may not be that the quality of the city service was poor, it may be that they wanted this and you could only do this, right? So, but this is definitely an area to dig into further. I think it's really beneficial to understand, what the expectations for city services are, so that you can start moving people into that, okay, you said this thing, you did that thing, and now I trust that you'll keep doing that thing. All right, in the same vein, we did ask about willingness to fund priority services. So I think we discussed, earlier when I was here this summer, about what are the opportunities for revenue generation in the city. In the past, the city has done some strong work on infrastructure with additional tax revenue. And so we asked specifically about 4 tax types, or 4 revenue types: a use tax, a sales tax increase, a utility rate increase, or a property tax increase. And truly, use tax was the only thing that had a majority of folks saying they would be somewhat willing or very willing to support. And that came in at about 50%, or 51% of folks said that they would have some willingness to do that. Those who are 65 plus and those who are in the lower income group, so the 40,000 income group, I suspect some of those are the same folks, are hugely, or they're overlapping, we know, and then maybe those are presenting the opportunity to do the most targeted engagement if you were going to go after a sales tax, or rather a use tax of some kind, or any kind of revenue increase. It sounds like those are the folks who are the most skeptical of it. So keep that in mind as you're out talking about any revenue generation opportunities. When asked, if we did have new revenue, what would you want us to do with it? Here's that street maintenance that I talked about. Everyone said that was very important to prioritize. Much lower would be parks and general government operations. Much less positive sentiment about that. So streets would be your biggest bang for your buck in this way. We also added an other comment so people could respond if they did have other things they want to prioritize. It was utilities, infrastructure, a couple of comments on law enforcement, a community center, sidewalks, and then business attraction. but those are all things that have appeared elsewhere on the survey already. Okay, so in 5 years, do you think that you'll live here? This is that question, cross-tabbed against these different dynamics. And I circled the demographic groups that were least likely to say yes. This includes your younger residents, lower income residents, and then those who have lived in Pleasant Hill 5 years or less. Part of this is the level of uncertainty, so the gray on these scales. Definitely, I think that's a dynamic in the lower income groups, especially if they're renting or they aren't sure what their living situation is going to be. And so that might be a factor there. I think it's truly the 25 to 35-year-old demographic and then the 80 to 120,000 income group that really made me pause at this chart, and it raised some concerns. I'm only guessing, but I would suspect that a lot of those residents falling into those demographics really represent some of the future for Pleasant Hill, the income growth, these, age in place type individuals. And so they're the ones you want to retain. It wasn't a huge number who said, no, I'm not going to be here at all, but I think it was worth pointing out. 20% of younger people say that they might leave in the next 5 years. All right, looking at your strategic planning question. So this is that open-ended question I've talked a little bit about already. I want to note here that this is what residents say they want from your strategic plan. And that obviously makes it crucial and important. But there's also things from this survey that are observed that maybe don't explicitly get called out here. So I just kind of wanted to put that caveat on it, that these are the open-ended comments that people responded to, but there's also some of those nuances we've already talked about. I think that honestly, these themes validate some of the numerical scores and the responses. This is not necessarily an ordered list, but it does represent the top 10 major theme areas. I sort of embedded, or I rather sort of grouped a lot of topics under these top 10. So, under the economic development, business growth, things like local business support, that's where restaurants, retail options, that's where that appeared. Road maintenance, it was heavily emphasized, one of the top priorities, and that of course falls into the theme of roads, streets, curbs, maintenance. Senior youth services under recreation, utility infrastructure, and then concerns about taxes being too high, or at least the desire to see the city being transparent and using tax funds really well. And that shows up in taxes, fiscal responsibility, and government. So these key insights, the numbered list here specifically show to me that people want things to do in Pleasant Hill. We've talked about that for indoor recreation. They want to see investments in hard infrastructure and the utilities. They want reasonable taxes, and they want to balance growth and character. And I know that is such a hard thing to do, but that showed up very much numerically, but also in all of the comments as well. They love the small town feel, but they also want amenities that can help them and improve their quality of life. So my big takeaways are here, just rounding it all out. The residents really care, taking it back to the beginning. They really care about Pleasant Hill. They love living here for a variety of reasons. But they are looking for basic amenities. They are looking for opportunities that they really feel are missing in town, that they're driving elsewhere to do things that they really want to do. Again, police services, parks, huge areas of strength for the city. I think that there's also a need to focus on some effective and basic service delivery for city services and programs. Really thinking in a customer-oriented mindset, and really also, in addition to this type of survey, doing surveys of your residents on a regular basis who are using the services and making sure you're doing some of those spot surveys to make sure improvements are taking hold. And then also, from that communication and engagement standpoint, the city does have a baseline of engaged residents. I think just minor tweaks in communication will really go a long way for helping residents feel more engaged and informed. And then the one I hate saying is that at this point, a use tax is really the only additional revenue source that I think is viable for the city. And then to effectively pursue that, you need to continue to build trust, because I think that those trust chart with that chart together, gives me pause about how well that question would do if you put it forth to your voters. So just keeping in mind that's a really big thing that I think that you can do with your strategic plan is lay out what your priorities are, but use this information to help decide how you prioritize and what specific actions that you want staff to take. And then communicating that to your residents that, hey, we heard you and we're doing this about it. So, all right. That was a lot of information and data. So take a deep breath. Let me know if there's any questions.
Very good information.
Yeah, thank you.
So will a more detailed report be available to both us and the public?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to take this back and take the, right now it's a slide deck. I'm going to turn it more into an actual written report with the details of all of the satisfaction and break out any other things that we find as we go along. So.
And I'll make sure that you have this slide deck tonight so that you can review it ahead of your strategic planning session on Thursday.
So am I hearing you say that it would behoove us to, like, I don't know, pick a topic, streets, and say, we've heard you, and here's what we're trying to do, or here's what to look forward to?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I think in other cities I've worked with and worked for, sometimes that's a matter of putting up a sign that says these, this new street coming soon, new sidewalks being installed, we heard you, your voice matters, that type of thing. So, and just communicating it broadly.
Like the progress is promised, kind of.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's some of the gains you can make in communication as well. Just telling people what you are doing and how you're doing it, and then, why you decided that versus something else.
Anything else from council?
Will we have this available for our strategic planning session also?
Well, I think Kylie's got her work cut out for her.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there anything else from members of the council?
Do we have a local nonprofit lined up for the next meeting?
We don't at this time. I wasn't sure how long this presentation or the dispatch was gonna take,
Oh,
which is
that's-
the only reason why we didn't have one for this one, but we will get something lined up for our next meeting as well. I believe our next meeting, we will have the community betterment work session beforehand as well, so, but we'll get that worked out.
Is there an update on the cone on 7 Highway yet?
Yes, I spoke to MoDOT today, and they are waiting for Beetle Brothers to finish up some fixes on some issues that they've had. They've had to cut out a few pieces of sidewalk, make some repairs, and then some other issues that they need to take care of. As soon as they're done with those, then they will.
Did they have any kind of estimate that we can maybe put out to the public?
He did not give me a timeline, so I do not have that.
Thank you.
Anything else? If there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Having a motion and a second, we'll have a roll call vote, please.
Councilwoman Niner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Doomer,
Yes.
Councilman Patterson,
Yes.
Councilwoman Elliott.
Yes.
We are adjourned.